Several months ago, Anthony C and Bronycurious released a rather extensive video about their views on A Canterlot Wedding, and I must say it is quite well done. They put a lot of work into the project and made a very entertaining review. If you haven't seen that yet, I would highly recommend it. I'll post a link in the description. What really got me thinking, though, were all the issues they had with the episodes, and how those elements really dragged down the overall story. Personally, I enjoyed watching A Canterlot Wedding when I first saw it. Even though I could see some flaws here and there, I was thoroughly enjoying some of the positive aspects. And there really are some fantastic moments here. However, ever since I saw that video from Anthony C and Bronycurious, I've been spending a great deal of time trying to think about how the episode could be rewritten in order to make for a more cohesive story, as well as create a bit more of an interesting character in Chrysalis. First off, there is the issue with shining armor in Princess Cadence. I think I can agree that giving Twilight a brother that shows up out of nowhere without any previous mention of him is a bit of a stretch, especially with how the episode portrays Twilight's relationship with Shining Armor, as a big brother best friends forever. You'd think that Twilight would have talked about him at some point during previous episodes. However, if Twilight had a bit more of a strained relationship with Shining Armor, that could make for a more believable twist. Mind you, just a bit here, as the story element with Twilight wanting to protect her brother from Cadence does help the story and create some good conflict. With Cadence, I really do feel that making her an alicorn was more of a corporate decision rather than a story-driven one. But I don't find anything really wrong with her character. She may not stand out all that much, but I don't think that she is poorly written either. The fact that she is an alicorn is kind of puzzling, but that really doesn't take anything away from the story here. Now, on to some of the more important elements. The fact that Chrysalis ended up dueling with Celestia shows some rather poor planning on the part of Chrysalis. Granted, she did end up winning that duel, but she was honestly surprised that she had managed to pull it off. But with some tweaking here and there, we can make Chrysalis into a much more subtle and cunning villain. Like, for example, the fact that Shining Armor is maintaining a city-wide shield around Canterlot is because there was a threat made against the capital. Granted, we don't know for certain just what this threat was and where it came from, but if Chrysalis was the one who made that threat, then that kind of flies in the face of her logic. If she really was trying to play the part of Princess Cadence, why bother making any threat to the city in the first place? Most everyone had fallen for the disguise, even with Chrysalis acting spoiled and selfish. Personally, I think having the city-wide shield up could make for a good story element, if the threat wasn't made against Canterlot. What if instead the threat had been made against, say, Manhattan or some other large city? And then what if Celestia herself had decided to go to that city to protect against that threat, along with a good portion of the Royal Guard? Of course, Celestia would have to ensure that the capital was well protected while she was away, and thus would entrust Shining Armor with that duty. She could have even taught him how to put up that shield around the city. And if Chrysalis was the one to make the threat against that other large city, then she would have successfully drawn Celestia and many of her royal guard away from Canterlot, making for a more well-thought-out plan and showing that she has some great cunning. Her mind control of Shining Armor would also make a lot more sense if perhaps she had made Shining use the shield to keep the citizens of Canterlot from escaping, allowing only the Changelings to freely move in and out of the city. Now, as for the Changelings terrorizing the populace, in my headcanon the Changelings can feed upon all kinds of strong emotions, not just love. Although love is by far the most powerful emotion they can feed upon, and certainly the preferred method of feeding for Chrysalis, they can still get plenty of power from others by feeding on their fear. This would make a lot more sense story-wise, as the Changelings are intentionally terrorizing the populace. As for the main six, their battle with the Changelings is quite enjoyable to watch, and there really isn't anything that I would change about how it is already. However, their attempt to reach the elements of harmony ends up failing, bringing them right back where they started. So that part of the story really doesn't add anything to the overall narrative. It is entertaining for sure, but doesn't drive the plot forward. So if we aren't going to change the scenes that are here already, how can we make them better? Personally, I would add more onto it. giving each of the main six a chance to stand out in fighting off the changelings. Like with Applejack, she ends up having trouble trying to figure out which ones are her friends and which ones are changelings. In my headcanon, Applejack being the element of honesty would allow her to spot the lies, as it were. She would be the only one of the main six who could easily identify which ones were real and which ones were fake. And she could even use her skills with the rope that she seems to keep on her person at all times. With Rainbow Dash, she would easily be able to outrun, outfly, and outmaneuver the changelings that were trying to catch her. And she would be using her general awesomeness to be taking out changelings left and right. With Rarity, we know that she is not afraid to step up in the middle of a fight. But she would easily get overwhelmed by sheer numbers. She would be desperately trying to think of a way to get the upper hand when she would get chased into a building that has hundreds of gems as part of the decor. Her natural skills would allow her to sense where all the gems are, and she has been shown to be able to handle levitating and firing multiple objects through the air. So she would end up using the many hundreds of gems as projectiles against the horde of changelings coming after her. With Pinkie Pie, well, she already stands out in the fight here, using Twilight as a makeshift weapon of rapid-fire destruction, and pulling out the party cannon from nowhere. We really don't need to add anything here. For Fluttershy, though, it is quite apparent that she doesn't want to fight at all. She spent her time avoiding the changelings and trying not to get noticed. However, I could see a situation where Rainbow Dash is displaying her general awesomeness in fighting off the changelings when she hears Fluttershy's cry for help a ways off. Rainbow would immediately go to her aid, but Applejack would be shouting at Rainbow to stop, as Applejack would recognize the trap for what it is. But with Rainbow being headstrong and loyal, she wouldn't understand the danger until the moment that the crying Fluttershy shifted back into a changeling and manages to capture Rainbow. Being tackled by several changelings at once, Rainbow would be unable to move as they begin using their green goo to hold Rainbow in place. And just as the changelings think they have succeeded, the real Fluttershy would show up and find her courage in defending her friend. The changelings would turn to face Fluttershy and immediately be overwhelmed by the stare. Fluttershy would be putting everything she has into her ability, and more than a dozen changelings would be frozen in place. Applejack would arrive, but would be unable to free Rainbow from the green slime. Fluttershy would tell Applejack to go help Twilight get to the elements, and of course Applejack would refuse to leave the two Pegasi behind. Until Fluttershy turns to Applejack, still using the stare, and commands her to go help Twilight. Twilight would come to the realization that even though the main six have been largely successful at fighting off the changeling horde, the changelings had managed to separate them from each other. Rarity would have run out of gems to use as projectiles at this point, along with Pinkie running low on her bag of tricks. Fluttershy would be straining herself just to keep the stare going, with Rainbow struggling in vain to escape. Even Twilight would be running low on magic power. Applejack would still be doing her utmost to keep the changelings from overwhelming Twilight, but Twilight would understand just how desperate their circumstances have become. Straining herself to call upon any reserves of magic that she has left, she would be thinking of her friends, Shining Armor and Cadence, and even Princess Celestia. And I could imagine the following scene play out. Twilight says to herself, "I can't fail. I can't fail. I won't fail." And at this point, we would see Twilight's deeply rooted magic power surface, just as it did on the day she got her cutie mark. And this display of power would immediately get the attention of Chrysalis, as well as even Princess Celestia from so far away. Chrysalis herself would descend upon Twilight, dueling with her in a manner quite similar to how she dueled with Celestia in the actual episode. Twilight's spells would be flying in all directions as she struggles to maintain control over her power. And in the end, Chrysalis would be able to bring Twilight down, sending her hurtling into the Canterlot Gardens and striking a certain statue. Applejack would arrive as quick as she can and see Twilight lying unconscious. While trying to rouse her awake, Applejack would notice a small crack in the statue that Twilight is lying against. Looking up, Applejack is shocked to see Discord. And at that moment, Chrysalis and her changelings would arrive, demanding that Applejack surrender Twilight to her. And of course, Applejack would be standing defiant, not willing to give in while she still draws breath, until she hears some chipping behind her, and Applejack is horrified to see the crack in Discord's prison is growing larger. With Twilight down for the count, and the rest of the main six subdued, all the contention is causing the stone around Discord to weaken. Faced with an impossible decision, Applejack decides to give in to the demands of Chrysalis. The next scene would play out quite similar to how it already is in the episode, although Applejack would be carrying an unconscious Twilight on her back. Chrysalis would be reveling in her triumph as her changelings are terrorizing the populace. That is until the changelings that were guarding the door to the throne room are sent flying into the walls, and Princess Luna arrives on the scene. Turns out that it wasn't only Celestia and Chrysalis that had noticed the magical surge from Twilight. There could also be some banter between Chrysalis and Luna here. Something like, "I'm actually surprised that you're here. I guess I had forgotten to account for your presence in my plans." Yes, I suppose that is something that I have gotten used to. Ponies forgetting that I exist. But as this banter is going on, Twilight begins to stir within her unconsciousness. Luna would be reaching out to Twilight in a dream, trying to rouse her awake, and telling Twilight that she needs to free Cadance and bring her to shining armor. And as Chrysalis begins to fight with Luna, her attention is drawn away from Twilight waking up. While still badly hurt and almost completely drained of her own magic, Twilight tells Applejack to take her over to Princess Cadance and manages to free her just like in the episode. And from that point on, A Canterlot Wedding would play out just like how it has already been written. Chrysalis would realize too late that shining armor had been freed from her control, reactivating the shield to push away all of the changelings. And the royal wedding would commence once Princess Celestia had arrived. With these changes to the story, I believe it would have made for a much stronger finale to Season 2. Chrysalis would have been given a much stronger plan for invading Canterlot, as well as some deeper cunning. The main six fighting with the changelings would have become even more enjoyable to watch, along with actually moving the plot forward. Celestia not even being in Canterlot would allow her to keep some dignity by not having her dueling with Chrysalis and ending up losing outright. And there would be an appearance from Luna, giving her a part to play in saving the day. Putting all these elements into A Canterlot Wedding solves a great many issues that both Anthony C and Bronycurious have with the episodes, and personally I think that such a story would be far more memorable as well. But what do you think? Would adding these story elements make A Canterlot Wedding more enjoyable for you? Or do you think that A Canterlot Wedding is just fine the way it is now? Or perhaps you have some of your own ideas on what you would change about A Canterlot Wedding. I would like to hear your thoughts about these story elements, and here's to looking forward for more enjoyable stories in Season 4. I am Dr. Wolf, and I look forward to hearing from you.